Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the meeting. Ross, any administrative announcements we've got? Okay, great. So what I want to do just briefly then is to welcome Kevin Dancy, the IFAC CEO. I think we're all familiar with the landscape of the rapid transition to accrual that we're seeing globally. So 30% in 2020, according to the most recent edition of the International Public Sector Financial Accountability Index, with the forecast that the number of governments on accrual around the world will increase to 50% by the end of 2025, and then maybe up into the 70s by the end of the decade, and with an increasing use of IPSASB during the period. So what we're doing at the moment as a standard setter is clearly important, but it's only part of the picture. And that's really where the partners that we work with in terms of adoption and in particular implementation, and the difference between a political commitment to adopting the standards and actually making that happen in practice, as we know, very significant. And certainly in that adoption and implementation space, IFAC is one of our absolutely key partners. Indeed, the reason why the index came into being is because IFAC has provided not only the financial but also operational support. In that, we also know that IFAC has developed the Pathways to Accrual portal, which is going to be tremendously important going forward. Working with SIPFA as a professional accountancy organisation. Of course, IFAC is IPSASB's majority funder, which is a tremendously important relationship. And last but by no means least, if you think about it this week, we've been gaining the benefit of actually being able to use IFAC's offices for our meeting and the fantastic support that we've had from the staff here during the week. So taking all of those into account and not wishing to take anything away from your intro, Kevin, welcome to the meeting. It's a great pleasure to see you here, and over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Happy to be here. Now, if you had your meeting in Toronto, where you normally would have your IPSASB meetings, I couldn't have been there in person, but I will come in through the ether today. I think there's some IPAC staff on the call as well. I think I saw Darlene's name and Laura's name and Chris's name. There may be somebody else as well, but there also are some IPAC staff on the call. I thought what I'd do, I don't want to talk for an hour, that's for sure. I do want to get feedback from you folks as well. Kind of just an outline of what I was going to do was talk a bit about our impact approach, which you may or may not have heard about in terms of what that is, generally in terms of what IPAC's trying to do, perhaps a bit more specifically about how IPSAS and the public sector fits into that, and then drill it down a little bit into some of the actual details around that. But I'm not going to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty details around specific, products or tools. But I think it's important to think about it in terms of the context, in terms of where IPSASB is on its journey, in terms of writing standards, getting standards adopted, getting standards implemented, et cetera, and really trying to make sure that we on the IPAC side of the house can best support you and your endeavors to make sure that those standards are widely adopted and implemented. I think I just want to put a little underlining on the word implemented going forward. So that's where I'd really like to get feedback from the board. Like I said, there are IPAC staff on the call who can call me out or correct me if I run adrift. I'll also make a few comments in terms of the ongoing odyssey that we've had with the monitoring group, which you've probably been looking over your shoulder at in terms of what we're doing with the ethics board and the audit and assurance board, and whether there's any lessons there or implications there in terms of IPSASB going forward. I think really nothing imminent that I can see, but I think it's just important for us to look at what we've done or will be doing on that side. And for you as a board to think about other things you should be doing on your side, to be on your front foot with that, particularly as it relates to, recognition, adoption, and implementation of the standards, the way regulators view the standards, the way other global stakeholders view the standards, and also in terms of, obviously a key issue for us always is the funding for the standards. But just on the so that's what I was going to cover. I can look for good feedback, questions, observations from the board. I have 2 slides. They're both a bit busy, so I think they've been printed out and circulated around. So you probably have either hard copy or electronic copy with you. But Donald, if you could put up the first slide, please. And what I was going to do in these 2 slides is just outline what we call our impact approach in terms of that we're trying to adopt at IFAC. Now, the first thing I want to tell you about that and stress about this is that this is not a new strategy for IFAC. This is really about better articulating our strategy, better articulating what we believe our value proposition is, so that it's better understood by 2 constituencies. One of the constituencies being all the stakeholders that we interact with globally, whether it be PIOs, the former firms, the standard setting boards, other global stakeholders like IOSCO or OECD, et cetera. So making sure that they, can best understand what we're trying to do and the impact we're trying to have. And the second significant audience is looking inward back on the staff, so that all the staff on the IPAC side of the house, as they go about their day-to-day activities. And, there's always an issue in any organization in terms of trying to best connect what the strategy is of the organization, what the organization is trying to do, back to each individual employee so they can see how they are contributing to that. So it's hopefully to have a simpler narrative so that folks could see how they fit in. So in terms of coming to grips with how we would best articulate our impact, we kind of went back to first principles, and we looked at IFAC's vision and IFAC's purpose, which are on this slide, on both sides of the slide. And this vision for IFAC, which is a vision for the accountancy profession, and you can see it on this slide. It's essential to strong, sustainable organizations, financial markets, and economies. And IFAC's purpose, which is on the right-hand side, which is more geared to the relevance, reputation, and value of the global accountancy profession. That vision and that purpose have not changed for years. Okay, so again, this is no particular strategy or a change in our strategy. So pulling from the vision and purpose, we said, okay, if people want to really get a sense of what we're doing or trying to do, it's obviously we want to have an impact on the accountancy profession. Look at our purpose. And if you look at our vision, we'd like to see the connectivity impact that IFAC has on organizations, financial markets, and economies. Right? That's what we said our vision and purpose is. So let's gear our narrative and gear what we're doing to these particular areas. So we came out with 3 particular impact areas, all with the introductory moniker of strong and sustainable. In terms of what we're trying to do is have our impact on a strong and sustainable accountancy profession, which you see there, strong and sustainable private and public sector organizations, and strong and sustainable financial markets and economies. So it's a very logical, direct connection back to our vision and purpose. And under each of those 3 impact areas, we've identified a number of focus areas. So for example, if you look at the accountancy profession, we've looked at, so what are we doing around PIO resiliency resilience and adaptability? What are we doing around accountancy firms and networks? What are we doing around the audit, insurance, ethics, and education standards? No, you don't see IPSASB standards there, and I'll talk about that in a second. What are we doing around assurance? What are we doing around ethics? So those are the focus areas. And we think if we're doing stuff and various actions in those focus areas, that will help lead to a strong and sustainable accountancy profession. And then if you go to the bottom right of the slide in terms of private and public sector organizations, again, you see the focus areas there are, a lot of the PIB stuff we're bringing into this, which is, professional accountants and CFOs and business leaders, the corporate governance and audit committee work, and very importantly, public financial management and public sector finance. Okay, so that, again, we have to look at our actions in this particular area, and does it have an impact in terms of leading to strong and sustainable private and public sector organizations. And then the final one is the impact we have on financial markets and economies. And if you think about the work that IPAC does, obviously, I think it's probably pretty self-evident that the most direct impact would be on the top one in terms of accountancy profession, a little less direct on private and public sector organizations, and probably even more indirect in terms of what we're doing in terms of financial markets and economies. But we do believe we have a role and can do things to have an impact in that area as well. And when you look at the focus areas under financial markets and economies, the first one you'll see is international reporting standards. And for example, that's where the support for IPSASB would come. That's also where the support for IFRS standards and the new standards coming out of the Sustainability Standards Board under the IFRS Foundation would come as well. And that's there because those standards, those reporting standards really, support strong and sustainable financial markets and economies. They're much broader than just supporting a strong accountancy profession, where you saw the assurance and ethics standards up in that top circle. And then the other ones in terms of financial markets and economies, the other two are, business professional and public sector integrity, which has been an increased focus for us, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then also all the multilateral engagement we're doing on behalf of the profession. So, like I said, this is not a new strategy for IPAC. It's just a better, hopefully, articulation of the impacts we're trying to have to try to put some meat on the bones in terms of what we're trying to do to achieve our vision, which is a vision for the profession and our purpose as an organization, so that it's better understood by third parties, and as I said, better understood by staff. Because if it's not understood by staff, and if staff don't buy into it and understand the strategy and have the right culture to drive the strategy, then we're not going to be successful. In the interior part of that slide, you also see some of the UN's SDGs, because obviously one of the things we'd like to demonstrate in terms of our actions and our activities is that it is having a positive impact on achieving UN's SDGs. So that's a bit of a topside view in terms of our impact approach. If I just go to the next slide briefly, and this one is really a bit of eye candy. It's really lifted from our annual review, which we just published a couple of weeks ago, really showing how this all kind of fits across the landscape in terms of our value creation. So as you see, we have our vision, purpose, and our values, and that leads to the 3 strategic objectives. They have not changed. When we talk about our comparative advantages, IPAC's a small organization, so we have to really think about, if we're going to do something, why are we best positioned to do it? And it's often because we're a good platform, a good convener. We can be a good knowledge gateway. We can be the global voice of the profession. So that's the lens we use to sometimes decide whether we're going to do something or not do something. Because, with 50 staff on the IPAC side of the house, we can't do everything. And of course, we can only do a lot of what we do by leveraging the work of others. So then we go into our key activities, the types of things we do, which drives the focus areas I just talked about, which then drives the impacts that we want to have. So we've been basically developing this approach for the last year. It was introduced really in our annual review, which I said for 2021, which we just put out a week or so ago. It will be baked into our strategy for 2023 and beyond, which we will take to the board for approval in September and then council in November. So I just really wanted to give a bit of that topside view so you had, kind of that 50,000 foot view in terms of what IFAC is doing. So now to just bring it down a notch in terms of how this relates to IPSAS and IPSASB. You can see that IPSASB, the public sector, really cuts across all three of those impact areas. If you looked at the, strong and sustainable accountancy profession, you're in there in a couple of ways. One obviously is we have been pushing for PAOs to broaden their membership. Many PAOs in IFAC were created to really regulate auditors. And that's still the basis on which many PAOs operate around the world, is that their membership is restricted to and is just members of the audit profession. I've said a number of times that if that's the strategy that PAOs want to follow, I think a number of them will ultimately likely fail in terms of the environment we're in, because their membership base is going to be too narrow. I can see a lot of rationalization within that piece of the PAOs if that's what they continue to want to do. What we've encouraged them to do, and Ian and Ross are aware of this because we've pushed this hard at a couple of the last CE forums we've had, is we said, look, there's a huge opportunity, not only an opportunity, but a responsibility as you look at the public sector and the adoption of accrual accounting that Ian talked about earlier, and the adoption and implementation of IPSAS standards. There's a huge opportunity, need, challenge to get that right in public sector organizations around the world. This is an area where PAO should step into the breach, have membership in those, have the professional accountants who are in public sector organizations as members in their organizations so they can best support them and frankly capitalize on the opportunity, but also serve the public interest by meeting that need. Because if there's not the right competency in the public sector to move to accrual accounting and to adopt IPSAS standards, it's going to be a very bumpy road in terms of effective and efficient adoption and implementation of accrual accounting and then IPSAS standards. So you fit in there. You also fit in there. I know Darlene's on the call. We're doing work with Gavi Global Fund and USAID has just signed the MOU as well in terms of utilizing funding from them and using PAPA as the implementator in terms of driving the public sector agenda in a couple of jurisdictions within Africa. So again, in terms of capacity building, I think the public sector and IPSAS comes through in that first impact area about strong and sustainable accountancy profession. Then if I went to the second impact area in terms of strong and sustainable private and public sector organizations, I think you see yourself there. And the third one in terms of public financial management and public sector finance. Again, a lot of tie-in on the IFAC side of the house between with the PAIB advisory group, which is kind of a acronym for Professional Accountants in Business Advisory Group, but that also deals with professional accountants in the public sector as well, and in terms of what we can do to help drive public financial management and public sector finance. And I would say in terms of the last few years, as we have articulated what our priorities are on the IFAC side, I don't have it for you today, but if you went back and looked at our one-page placemat that we did for the B20, G20 last year, you would see sustainability and public financial management as the two big priorities that we were pushing on. So public financial management, strong public sector organizations figures prominently in the second impact area. And then if you go to the third impact area, well, like I said, it really pops up a couple of places, well, probably across all three. Clearly most directly in the international reporting standards and the support we give for IPSASB, whether that be operational support, funding support, and as Ian talked about, the adoption and implementation support, which I'll turn to in a second. Obviously, business professional and public sector integrity, which we have moved on as a priority this year as well. Again, as I said earlier, if you went back a year ago and looked at the submission we gave to the B20 G20, I said it had sustainability and public financial management as the key priorities. I think we came to the realization towards the end of last year and into this year that, yeah, those are two really important priorities for us. And then we asked ourselves, so what are the impediments in terms of trying to be successful in those two areas? And there's a number, as we know with any global approach to things, and we can talk about what your approach will be in terms of sustainability in a second. But one of the key impediments that we saw in terms of those two areas was the degree of, frankly, corruption around the world. There's a lot of money chasing a number of those activities. But there's also a lot of corruption. If the money doesn't end up in the right place, you're not going to be as effective and as efficient as you could be. So coming out of that, we said we really need to up our game at the IPAC level in terms of what our strategy is around anti-corruption, money laundering, enhancing integrity, et cetera. And this isn't about enhancing integrity of professional accountants. Is about enhancing more integrity in business, public sector, et cetera. And again, I think in terms of what you're trying to do in terms of your agenda, I think you can see yourself in that particular focus area as well. So again, I think if you look at what we're trying to do in the IPAC side of the house in terms of the impact approach, hopefully you can see from your perspective in terms of the IPSAS standards and public sector more generally, that there's a strong degree of connectivity and commonality in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. I think, looking at IPSASB and looking at IFAC, we can be quite complementary and reinforcing in terms of getting the world to where we think the world needs to be. I think you can take the slide down now, Donald, and I'll make some more comments. Just check my time here. I got a fair amount of time. So just, maybe drill it down to the next level in terms of, like I said, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about any specific adoption and implementation tool, but just a couple of general topside comments in terms of what we've been doing on the IPAC side of the house and where we think we're going with that going forward. And then you really need to hear the feedback from you folks. Does that make sense from your perspective? I think if, Laura or Barry Naik or Chris were here to talk about what we've been doing on the adoption and the implementation side over the last few years, there's been what I would say a lot of development of product and tools. For example, there was the COVID-19 tool, there's the work we've done on training the trainer, there's the pathways to accrual. There's obviously the accountability index, which has been updated. So there's been, work done and effort expended in terms of developing product or tools. I think as we go forward, over the next year or two, it's not so much about developing new tools. It's probably about making sure that the tools we have developed are utilized, best fit for purpose. There may be issues around translation of those tools. Again, always a demand for that. And we understand that. It's just always a challenge with the resources we have in terms of doing everything that people would like us to do. But I think it's more of a general focus in terms of trying to make sure those tools are well utilized, adopted, and implemented. If they need some enhancement, or case studies and pathways to accrual, so be it. So I think that's, as a general topside comment on that aspect. I think it's about things in terms of, again, enhancing our outreach in the various regions around the world and just enhancing visibility. I think, Ian, you were on a event we did this week in the MENA region, particularly on the public sector. So I think with the way IFAC is structured with its regional engagement teams, we do have, I think, a good ability to reach out into particular regions around the world where it makes sense. And again, complements what you were trying to do. As I said, the accountability index is a significant one as well, which helps track, where we are in adoption of accrual accounting, adoption and implementation of IPSASB standards. Again, I think important to look at that, in terms of the methodology used for that one, the methodology used in our global impact map, et cetera, just to make sure that we're aligned and are tracking this data as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And I think that dovetails with, I think, if I could predict where you may be going, in the sense of, as I've followed IPSASB since I first joined the IPAC board in 2006, done a lot of work in terms of developing standards, whether they be, somehow derived from the IFRS standards or your own standards that you've developed on your own, because, the public sector is different than the private sector. It seems to me you're well along in the journey in terms of developing a lot of the financial reporting standards and probably a lot of emphasis in terms of adoption and implementation of those standards. And again, if there's things that we can do to help you in that, please let us know. And of course, I probably should make a few comments about sustainability as well, because that's a significant issue. It was great to see the World Bank ask IPSASB to take the lead in putting a paper out there to assess the demand for this and the way forward for this. And it was great to see you get your paper out. It was early May. I think it was early May. I lose track of all these consultations these days. But it'll be very interesting to see the feedback from them and what your decisions are about that. Just as we've seen a huge demand for enhanced reporting on the private sector side. And it's an area that IPAC's been heavily involved with over the last year or two in terms of pushing for an IPSASB and how that reporting should be done. We certainly look forward on the IPAC side of the house to support your endeavors if you're going to move into that space as well. I think where I'll go now is I'll make a few comments about the monitoring group on the IPAC side, and then I probably would have used up about half of my time, Ian, and then just open it up for questions, observations from the group. So just the one thing I'd say about the monitoring group, if you follow that process, it's been ongoing for a long time. Monitoring group is a group of global regulators, it's dominated mainly by IOSCO, but there's Basel, which is the global body for the central banks. It's FDR, which is the global body for the audit regulators. It's World Bank is there, European Commission is there, the insurance folks are there, etc. And they have wanted to make sure that not only are IPSASB and IPSASB independent from the accountancy profession, which I think, frankly, they have been since we implemented the IFAC reforms coming out of 2003. But they really wanted to make sure that the perception of that independence was well accepted and understood. So we've gone through quite a long odyssey journey. We are now at the position where we have agreement on all of the recommendations to implement, which is good. It's a good package of recommendations. It does enhance the perception of independence of IPSASB and IPSASB, but very importantly, it does retain a key role for the accountancy profession going forward, but with the right checks and balances. Just a couple of things that it dealt with in terms of the perception of independence, and these issues are there for IPSASB as well. They're not. I'm not hearing them on the IPSASB side. I haven't heard them from the Public Interest Committee as being particular issues, but they could be down the road. The sound bites that were not good on the IPAC side of the house is, as I said, we've said that IPSASB and IPSASB are fully independent of the accountancy profession, and really have been since the implementation of the 2003 IPAC reforms and the creation of the Public Interest Oversight Board, or PIOB. You then have to say in the next sentence, oh, and by the way, the standard setting boards are committees of IPAC. So it's not a great soundbite. People say, well, wait a second, you're independent of IPAC, but they're committees of IPAC. How does that work? Okay, so that's one. Second one is the nominations process. The way the nominations process had worked up until this year for IPSASB and IPSASB, and it works this way for IPSASB, is that the nominations process is run by the IPAC nominating committee, which is chaired by the president of IPAC. Now, for IPSASB and IPSASB, the PIOB observed all of those meetings and, in fact, had to approve the appointments to the board. So you say, well, it's independent because the final say on the approval is with the PIOB. But again, the soundbite, the nominations process is chaired by the president of IPAC. It's just the soundbite. So the soundbite and the perception is not good. So we've dealt with both of those issues in terms of monitoring reform. We have a new nominations committee, which is under the auspices of the PIOB. It's not chaired by the president of IPAC. But most importantly, it has very good terms of reference and needs a minimum of 3 audit practitioners on that committee. And IPAC has been heavily involved in terms of helping to source people and put people on that committee. So again, the soundbite's just a lot better. And in terms of where the standard setting boards will be housed, they'll be housed in a U.S. not-for-profit entity that will be outside of IPAC. But for all intents and purposes, when you look at all the recommendations and you look at the way the structure is going to work going forward, in terms of what IPAC does on a day-to-day basis in terms of supporting standards, the IPSASB and IPSASB standards is not really going to change. But the perception will definitely change because there will be a U.S. not-for-profit legal entity, likely the same type of legal entity that the IFRS Foundation has used to house the standard setting boards. So we've dealt with, I think, the real perception issues which were causing issues. The one perception issue we have not solved yet is a diversified funding model, which is always a challenge in terms of the standard setting side of the house, and it's a challenge for you folks as well. So I think my only thought for you folks here is I don't think there's anything imminent, but I think it does behoove all of us, and Ian and I have chatted about this, to just watch what's happening in the monitoring side of the house for IPSASB and IPSASB. And since it happened on that side of the house, could it happen on the public sector side of the house? It could. And so my view of looking forward and strategy is always to try and be on my front foot as much as possible. So I think, are there learnings from that we could do to enhance any of the perceptions or lack of independence for the public sector accounting standards? And would it be helpful to address those? Would it help you in terms of adoption and implementation? Would it help you in terms of raising money, etc.? Please don't take this as any statement that IPAC wants to walk away from supporting you. Because I think, as I demonstrated, hopefully, with the outline of the impact approach at the top side of my comments, supporting a strong public sector and supporting the adoption and implementation of the IPSASB standards is it's interwoven throughout all those 3 impact areas. So that support, that commitment's not going anywhere. I'm just saying, you know, if it happened on that side of the house, let's just think if there's lessons learned and that we could do, and whether that would help or not. If it's not going to help you, then you shouldn't do it. But I don't think we should have our heads in the sand either in terms of ignoring what's happened with other standard setters. I think perhaps one final comment I would go back to, and this is probably just kind of an overriding comment back on the adoption and the implementation side, is I think a lot of what we try to do and want to do is to be what we call demand driven, in the sense where we see the demand coming through our regional engagement with your board, et cetera, so that we can best meet the demands that are out there. You know, we can't sit here and make this up on our own in terms of assuming this is what people need. We really need to hear what the need is, and then how best we can work to satisfy that need within the fiscal constraints and other limitations in terms of our resources that we have. So Ian, I've actually talked for a little longer than I thought, but perhaps I can pass it back to you and have any comments from you or any of the members of the board. And also, I'd just say if there's any IPAC staff person that thinks I misstated anything, please interject or put something in the chat.
So thank you very much, Kevin. I think that was a really good survey of both the high level landscape, but also kind of positioning the work that we do in that broader landscape, and beginning to think about some of the trends going forward, some of the things that we need to think about as a board as we move into developing our strategy for 24 to 28, the dialogue we'll have with our stakeholders and so on. So I think that was a really helpful context setting, and I think it's sometimes easy to lose sight of when you're having a kind of detailed technical conversation about something like compliance obligations in the context of revenue recognition. What does this look like in the bigger context? So I think without further ado, perhaps I'd just ask the members and technical advisors as well if there are any questions that you'd like to put to Kevin in terms of what he said, in terms of things that you see happening out there in the landscape. How does this fit with what you're seeing in your jurisdictions, pressures and so on? So really at this stage, very much open up for for any comments, questions that you may have. Yeah, Todd, get us rolling.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you, Kevin, for a really helpful and interesting walk through IPAC's vision, purpose, and where you're at. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about our current landscape. I think, from what I understand, there seems to be a bit of a global shortage of professionals. Certainly from an audit perspective, we can't get all the auditors that we need to do work. We're starting to move into things like sustainability reporting, climate reporting, and all of this, expanded level of accountability that we're looking for from organisations. And I wonder whether, to be able to get through all of this, we're going to need to reach out to people with skills beyond the core accounting skills. And so I'm sitting here thinking, as we look out into the future, do we need to be thinking more in the accountability space rather than just the accountancy space, and really try and own that whole accountability space building off from an accounting sort of bodies to that broader accountability. And it's probably something that, individual jurisdictions, accounting member bodies need to be thinking about as well. But I wonder whether there's a role for IFAC in that as well, in terms of really starting to think about that accountability space. Just interested perhaps in any comments.
Thanks. Ian, why don't I take a couple of questions and then respond? I see Scott has hand up. I don't know if there's other people in the room with hands up, but maybe I take 3 or 4 questions and then we'll try to respond to all of them at once.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so thanks, Todd. I think, Linda, you were marginally ahead of Mari there. So, Mari, go ahead.
Thank you for your very important presentation. And from my point of view, it is so helpful, ideal situation. And at present, we are facing is these 3 important components are in fragmented situation. And so the base and the foundation is, from my point of view, financial markets and economies. And then the second tier is the financial markets and economies consist of private and public sector organizations. And so these 2 strongly connect factor is accountancy profession. And so the strengthen the public financial management is so important in both public sector and private sector. And so the important thing is these fragmented situation, how to this fragmented situation transfer to the strongly connected situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mari. Over to you, Lindy.
Thank you very much. And a lot of what you said resonates in my jurisdiction, and I thought, let me comment on that. Fully agree that we should be focusing on the adoption and implementation of the IPSASB standards in jurisdictions, because that's how we would be able to increase, the focus on public sector reporting, etc. But then we'd have to think about all the other experiences other boards have had in doing that. In our jurisdiction, I can now understand why our PAO has been pushing accrual accounting on us and making quite vocal that we should be making strides in accrual accounting. I couldn't understand why they are so interested, and I see now it's because of discussions at IFAC level. So you can at least know that it is working, certainly in our jurisdiction, and I think it actually is a good idea to push it, to get those bodies to engage with government, because it's in their interest as well that they are geared up and they support the institutions to do that. So I think it is a good initiative, although it was quite annoying to have them publish public articles on why we are not progressing as fast. But yeah. The other thing which you said, and I think is also quite important, and it's something that we're also looking at quite intensely at the moment, is around corporate governance and improving internal control environments. It's no secret that we've had quite a few failures in the corporate and in the public sector, and a lot of corruption. And I do think in helping governments move towards accrual accounting, it's not just what are the policies you need to implement, but what is the control environment? What does it need to look like? What are the governance arrangements that are important to have in place? I do think and support, that area that you have around improving public financial management is a key focus area. And it's something we're also looking at now. Also, maybe helping jurisdictions or users of the financial statements understand what is it that they're getting and how to interpret and use it would also be quite useful. So support, focusing in that area as well. It's, the financial statements is a story at the end, but getting to that is what's important. But thanks. So a lot of what you're saying is what we're doing, and quite happy to engage with you, if there's any inputs we can give or any support from our side as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindy. Kevin, you've had sort of New Zealand, Japan, South Africa there. We've got 4 more questions lined up. Do you want to pick up any of those points at this stage before I head to members?
You know, I'm happy to take the next 4 questions as well. I know I'm just cognizant of the time, and so I'll try and deal with as many questions as I can. I'm just noting down some comments here as I go, but I'm happy to get the next 4 questions.
Okay, that's great. So I'll go to Scott, then Lucy, then Adrienne, and Nima in that order.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Kevin, for your comments. Very much appreciated. One of the comments, I looked at your documents and it talks about strong and sustainable. And you mentioned briefly sustainability. You know, it's an area that we're beginning to look at. Sustainability obviously has a physical perspective, physical ability as well, and that's probably a more traditional way of looking at, particularly with the focus on ESG. Earlier this month, you issued a very brief document on championing an integrated mindset to drive sustainable value creation. A very interesting document on that. You say we need to be able to have a mindset on sustainability. So I would be interested in your views, because often when you get into sustainability, there's about 200 definitions that hit the table pretty quick. And so I'd be very interested in your view about how we should be thinking about sustainability. What should be our mindset as we move forward?
Great, thanks, Scott. Lucy, to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you also, Kevin, for that very useful update on the work of IPAC. One of the challenges accountants are facing is on leveraging to the fast-changing technology and automation. I would like to know, in connection with the impact of strong and sustainable accounting profession, what is IPAC's intervention in upskilling accountants in the area of automation and, like, for instance, on artificial intelligence, so they can boost their expertise and learn more about cloud-based accounting information systems and other IT-related areas such as ERP systems, data analytics, and even financial modeling and forecasting. And I would like to know if IPAC has the statistics on accountants all over the world who have IT skills or IT skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Adrienne, then I've got Nima and Claudia, and then perhaps go back to you at that stage, Kevin, for sort of comments on questions so far. Adrienne.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Kevin, for the very interesting presentation. I would like to, in a way, elaborate and echo Toad's concern about, and his comments about accountability versus accountancy. You rightly said that IPSASB and IASB are actually truly independent of the accountancy profession, but independence is one thing and consistency is another one. I would say that if PFM, public financial management, and accountability is the main beacon of all standard setters, the issue of consistency of the work of those standard setters is a very important issue, I would say. We probably need that all of the standard setters walk at the same pace and in the same direction. So I would be happy to hear your views on the cooperation and consistency issue regarding standard setters involved and working for improved and better PFM and accountability.
Thanks, Adrienne. So Nima and then Claudia, and then back to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Kelvin, for your presentation and the IPAC support towards accrual. Really, some of the documents being issued have been so helpful. The pathway to accrual, the East Standard, coming from a region where most of the countries are in the process of migrating to be able to comply with IPSAS accrual by 2025. I am from Tanzania, and therefore we find the language challenges in our neighboring countries. At the moment, Mozambique is trying to move to IPSAS, and the Portuguese, while using the English standards, become such of one of the challenges. But we're really working towards that. And we have the Africa Professionalization Initiative, which is also trying to support the IPSAS under the umbrella of the Pan-Africa Federation of Accountants, ESAG, and the AFROSAI, but also the Accountants Generals, the ESAG, Eastern and Southern African Accountants Generals, trying to form the African Association of Accountants Generals, all with the aim of complying with IPSAS accrual. And therefore, we find presentations such as these, the IFAC value creation, such motivating and showing the way towards the accrual, migration to accrual. So that's what I wanted to share from where I come from. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nima, for sharing those perspectives. And Claudia, to you before I go back to Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kevin, for your interesting presentation. And I want to focus on one certain key activity we have. One of the IFAC vision is promoting, monitoring, and supporting the adoption and implementation of international standards, especially accrual accounting standards. In Switzerland, we're using accrual accounting standards in the public sector for more than 30 years at state level. But what is still problematic is that the parliamentarians didn't really understand our outputs. So the public financial management, it still challenges them to find the key performance indicator, to understand what is in the balance sheet, what is in an income statement. And I think sometimes what is a little bit missing in our impacts and vision is, did we get or reach our stakeholders? How could we support them to understand how looks like or should be understood a balance sheet of a public sector entity, especially in private sectors? There are a lot of literature around about equity and everything, but it's different from public sector. So maybe there's a future idea to improve or get some more material for taxpayers, parliamentarians, how to use our prepared documents from the accountants.
Thanks, Claudia. So Kevin, back to you. Range of perspectives from around the world there.
Sure. Thanks for that. And lots of different comments. And I'll try and make some comments because some of the comments have played off one another as well. I think the good news I'll take away, I'll just say this at the top side, is that nobody said that we're way off base in terms of what we're doing. So that was the positive message I took away from it. A couple of comments around breadth of membership, accountability versus accountancy. The one comment about feeling the pressure at the jurisdictional level to push for a broader membership in the PAO. This is obviously a key aspect for us. There were a couple aspects to that question. One was, should and this is a question I can tell you that some PAOs are asking themselves is, should our church talk about in terms of a professional accountant in the public sector versus a professional accountant who's an auditor? Because that's obviously one aspect in terms of just getting the professional accountants in business or in the public sector into the PAO. That's an important element in and of itself. Then the other challenge was, to really do this enhanced reporting going forward. is the accounting profession really going to be able to do it on its own? You need a lot of subject matter experts, maybe it's engineers, maybe it's data scientists, et cetera, to kind of really get to the right end game in terms of the sustainability reporting. I can tell you some PAOs are looking at that particular issue. IPSASB is looking at the issue in terms of its code of ethics, in terms of should the code of ethics be utilized or adopted by others than professional accountants. That's a consultation they have out right now. I guess my bottom line on that is that when people challenge me or challenge us in terms of saying, well, can the accountancy profession do all the sustainability reporting? I think my answer is, the accountancy profession has been dealing with complex reporting issues for years. This is just another one. So yeah, we can. I think where the accountancy profession probably has to up its game is in terms of its subject matter expertise and in its collaboration efforts with subject matter experts. Some who may be inside the tent, some who may be continue to be outside the tent. That'll just evolve around the world. Of course, there's a whole other aspect of this, which I think is to succeed going forward. I think the first comment was about difficulty attracting auditors and getting auditors. I think, frankly, if the accountancy profession really pushes hard on the sustainability front, it will demonstrate to the current and next generation that this profession has a sense of purpose. And I think that will help us significantly in terms of the attractiveness of the profession, because frankly, professional accountants going forward in this world can be at the center of everything. And it is the language of business. It's getting that narrative out there, even in terms of the last question, in terms of getting the right narrative out there to the right stakeholders so they understand how to use the documents and information that professional accountants are involved in terms of creating. So this is a huge opportunity for the profession, I think, in terms of getting this right, which will help us with our attractiveness. And professional accountants really, and this is a word we use as well a lot, are really the enablers of the sustainability aspect going forward. Because, accountancy is the language of business. You need to be able to, one stakeholder needs to be able to speak to the other. And the accountancy profession can really be the enabler of that. There was a question around, I guess, also the cooperation and consistency amongst the various standard setting boards. And you're seeing a lot go on the sustainability front now with consultations ongoing by FRAG in Europe, by the IPSASB, and by the SEC in the US. And obviously, what we're pushing for is global harmonization, and please don't give us a lot of regulatory fragmentation, because that will certainly enhance costs and just be a compliance burden for organizations to deal with if they have to report things in different ways around the world. So hopefully they can come to grips in terms of agreement on for definitions and methodologies. And indeed, we put out a document a few weeks ago, just a one-page document with PRI, which represents a lot of investors, and the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, are really just calling for that main one thing, which is, we need harmonization around these activities. I think there is pretty decent cooperation going on right now, and particularly, I think one that's really enhanced in the last 6 months is the cooperation with the IPSASB and GRI. GRI has been, the Global Reporting Initiative has been involved in the sustainability space for a long time, and they have entered into an MOU, which I think is positive, which leads me on to perhaps Scott's question, really in terms of how we see sustainability going forward, in terms of, is there a common definition of sustainability and the integrated mindset? So on that issue, I would say, because I'm cognizant of the time, I would point you to a couple of documents. One we put out in May of 2021, which was our building blocks approach on sustainability reporting for the private sector. which really talked about building block 1, which is the in terms of sustainability reporting, is making sure that the reporting picks up all of the what we call the outside in impacts, the impacts on an organization's long-term performance, on its enterprise value creation. And that's what we call building block 1. And that's what global capital markets need. That's what global investors are demanding in terms of the private sector. That's what the IPSASB is focused on. Building block 2 is the impacts that an organization may have on the environment, people, whatever. But there's no what I call boomerang impact back on the long-term performance of the entity. That's building block 2. A lot of those are, have historically been GRI based, but I think a lot of those issues will be more jurisdiction specific and public policy driven. So in the private sector, I don't think you're going to see a lot of commonality necessarily around the world in terms of that kind of reporting, because what the public policy decision is in Europe is, I don't think we can expect it'll be exactly the same decision in the United States or the same decision in China or Asia. So public policy issues are jurisdiction specific, and accordingly, the reporting on those will be jurisdiction specific. I think in your case, it's a bit different, because when I'm looking at a public sector organization and what it's reporting on, I think you're going to be looking a lot more even at some of that, what I call building block 2 stuff and the GRI stuff. So but that'll be an issue for you guys to work through. But in terms of the document I'd look at, there is the building blocks document that we put out in May of 2021, which was adopted by OSCO in their report by June of 2021. On the integrated mindset one we put out last week, Ian, hopefully you can give me just a couple more minutes of what I call injury time in soccer terms, is the integrated mindset document we put out last week or the week before. I think is one of the more important documents that we put out. And this is important for whether you're in the private sector or public sector. If you look at sustainability reporting today, sometimes it's quite narrow on greenhouse gas emissions. And sometimes it's compliance based, because if they say they've done something, they get a nice little tick from a regulator. And sometimes the data isn't all that good, right? So for this thing to be a success going forward, inside organizations, you need the right systems. You need the right internal controls to generate the right data that will then support hopefully the right decision making by senior management, private sector, public sector, that will support the right oversight by boards of directors, will then support the right reporting, which you guys come in terms of your IPSAS standards, and ultimately hopefully be in a way, the standard will be structured in a way that is then ultimately assurable. And in terms of the assurability of that information, that's where the IPSASB will come in. And as you know, they're working hard on the sustainability front as well. But that's kind of the logical sequence of events. And that integrated mindset placement was look at saying professional accountants, CFOs, the finance team need to be involved in this. Right now in private sector organizations, you'll have often financial reporting under the CFO, sustainability reporting under the Chief Sustainability Officer, somewhere else in the organization. The reporting is done at different times. In North America, there's like 3-4 month gap between that type of reporting. Europe's a lot better. It's under 10 days in Europe in terms of the gap, in terms of that type of reporting. But that reporting needs to come together, and the CFOs and professional accountants need to be engaged. So you do get the right systems, internal controls. That's the sweet spot of professional accountants. And if you get that right, there's a good chance you'll get the stuff at the other end of the process right. If you don't get that stuff right at the front end, I'm not going to say it's garbage in, garbage out, but you know what I mean in terms of quality of data. Quickly looking at the technology, we have an education summit coming up in October this year. Its focus is going to be on technology. So if you really want to get engaged in terms of what we're doing on technology, that'll be probably a 3 to 4 days summit in October. Log into that. I can tell you within IFAC, we have a regular monthly tech checks between all the various groups and the standard setting boards in terms of how technology is being utilized, so we can learn from each other. So it point you in that direction. I don't know if that answered every question. Also on technology, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the IES platform, which of course you're aware of, which we launched in the last year, which has put all of the standards on e-format, which I think has been very well received by stakeholders. Ian, if there's things I haven't dealt with, please raise them, but I know I'm in injury time.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that was a a very full answer to the range of points, and I think it just goes to show the very dynamic and interconnected world in which we're going to be doing our work, and I think that's it's dynamic and interconnected, whether you look at it at the global level or whether you look at regions or jurisdictions. And I think that's where, going back to the start of your presentation, that being part of that global community is one of the really great strengths of us as a profession, but also I think us as a board. And you look at the outreach that this board does, technical advisors do, and that's going to become ever more important, I think, to make sure we are really connected and actually we continue to serve the public interest. So I think, thank you very much for the time you've taken today. Thank you very much for the support of the staff at IFAC. I know there's a number online. Barry Nike has been sitting patiently at the back, and Barry provided huge support in terms of the index, also the relationship with Forum of Firms, which Barry supports, very important, and I think increasingly important, in terms of the implementation spots. So I think it's great to be reminded about what IFAC is doing in the broader context, and we'd certainly appreciate you coming back at various stages as things unfold, and I think we will certainly make sure that IFAC continues to be informed of what we do and get value for the investment. And I think the comments that you made about the challenges we face going forwards, I think that whole strategic positioning for IPSASB in that new environment where more and more people are on a crawl around the world, more and more governments are using IPSAS. I think those words about the things we should be thinking about jointly become really important to ensure we keep on the front foot, both in terms of content, but in terms of governance and perceptions about the independence of our work. So I think that was really good. So maybe just a round of applause to thank Kevin and the IFAC team for what they've done and what they continue to do.
Yeah, and I would just say thanks, Ian, and again, my thanks to the team, a number who are on the call today. I think you said Barry's in the room, and Laura and Darlene and Chris are online, others as well involved, the comm support from Stephanie and Jen, etc. So I got to thank I probably left out some names, but there's a number of staff involved with connections to the public sector. So thanks and good luck. Keep in touch, and I think together we can accomplish a lot. Cheers.
Excellent. Cheers, Kevin. And thanks everyone in terms of the team that's been present for this session. And now we move to talk about the Public Sector Standards Setters Forum. Ross, over to you.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the forum. We started the discussions earlier this week, but we wanted to go through a few slides and just give a bit of context setting. One, to try and spur some interest and get everyone to find the time to come and register, but also to walk through at a high level what we're thinking for the agenda and what we'll cover during the forum, because it will be increasingly important for our work, not only in completing what's on the work program now, but looking forward to what we'll be doing in the future. So I would say of the 4 public standard setter forums we've planned to date, this one is probably more forward-looking than any of them. And I'll walk through that in a bit of detail. But one of the things that strikes me when I look at the current work program and think about what we'll be talking about at the forum and in our future strategy is we're at an interesting point in the development of the standards and in the delivery of our current work program. If you look at our work program, most of our major projects started 4 or 5, some even longer terms a year ago. And we've been spending the last 18 months kind of either building EDs or starting to complete EDs and kind of close things out. And it's kind of a cycle we've been in before, where we're finalizing and completing guidance, very much convergence thinking that's been going on for a long time. But then we'll quickly flip in early 2023 and afterwards into a lot of projects where we're really at the beginning in divergent thinking. So what's the scope? What are the issues we're going to address? How are we going to solve these issues? And what are the issues? And it takes a different mindset from both the staff and the board on that. So just kind of highlighting that as something that strikes me, because I remember when I was a newer staff back in 2014, 2015, and we were adding all these projects we're trying to complete now, it was a different skill set. It was a different engagement from the board, task forces to kind of set the project briefs, develop the consultation papers, get the scoping right, ask the right questions of our constituents. And then once we get the feedback from those consultation papers, well, how do we turn that into the thinking that we need for a standard so we can develop an ED and go out and check with our constituents on it? So it just kind of strikes me, we're at that point again. And again, we're adding big issues that we haven't contemplated deeply before, like sustainability. And another important issue that's starting to come up prominently in our discussions and from our stakeholders is implementation and interpretations. So again, we'll go through a few slides here and talk it through, and we'll pause for a couple of opportunities for members to comment as well. So I'll just start with an overview. And again, this is all information you might have already heard, but I just want to take the opportunity to emphasize it. So this is the 4th Standard Setters Forum we've held. Our theme is IPSASB 2.0, taking it to the next level. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that and why it's 2.0, taking it to the next level as we start to talk about what we'll talk about at the forum and what the dialogue will be about. It wouldn't be right to not give thanks to our very kind and patient host, the Order of Certified Accountants. I won't try and pronounce the Portuguese name. If João was here, I would ask him to help me out. Maybe I'll ask Patricia to help me.
Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados.
Yes, thank you. My Portuguese isn't great, even though I've got João to practice with in the office. And the reason I wanted to call them out in particular is this forum we've been planning since 2019. Unfortunately, in 2020, we all know what got in the way of us delivering this in September 2020. But the OCC in Portugal have been fantastic hosts and very patient and continually agreeing to work with the hotel that we have a contract with to delay and defer, change the forum, and also stay engaged to deliver it when we can. So we do think that the current situation and the evolution of the pandemic means we'll be able to take forward the forum, and we plan to do so in September. But again, just thanks to our hosts for all the support on that. A key thing to flag, if you don't have them in your calendars, is please note September 19th and 20th. And that's a Monday and Tuesday, the week immediately following our board meeting, which will occur in Lisbon, the Monday to Thursday, the prior week. So the location is Cascais in Portugal, which is a short train ride away from Lisbon. I've never been there, but João tells me it's a beautiful place and you won't want to miss it. And then lastly, if you haven't registered yet and you're planning on going, please register as soon as possible. Space will fill up quickly and you want to make sure you get a spot to come and join us. It's a hot ticket. And I would really encourage anyone who's having questions or not sure whether they're interested or not, to reach out to staff if you have any specific questions. But we really have richer and deeper forums when we have broad engagement and we have as many people from as many jurisdictions as possible. And I think the location in Portugal is one of the best yet for being fairly central to a lot of different regions and a real opportunity to really get as many people from as many places attending. And just to note again, for those who've never been before, it is targeted to people who are standard setters. But that doesn't mean you necessarily need to be a standard setter only. So we are flexible and those who are involved, and we will make a judgment call. But we have had people who come from the policy teams in the central governments, even at the state levels, who are helping implement the standards. What we're really looking for is people who have an understanding in their jurisdiction of accrual accounting and the issues being encountered in it, developing and implementing accounting policies in the public sector and implementing standards. So it is a wide group of people. And if you have any questions, you're not sure if a certain person in your jurisdiction's right, or if you're watching online and you're interested, reach out and ask the question if your profile is the right fit, and we'll let you know. But again, don't be shy to put yourself forward if you're interested in coming to the forum. So this is a very high level overview of the 2-day agenda. And I'll take you through this quickly, and then I'm gonna maybe pause there for a couple of initial questions. And then Eileen, who's online, is going to take us through the 2 days agenda with a couple of insights on each of the sessions. And I did want to give a special thanks to Eileen. She's been helping me significantly in the planning and organizing of the event, along with several other staff who are helping develop the agenda, think about the sessions, how we'll execute them, find us speakers. But Eileen in particular has stepped up and really been involved in the organization. So that's why she's going to be helping me with the next 2 slides. So day 1, obviously we're going to have a welcome and an opening remarks. Not much to say there, and I'll leave you hanging a little bit on that one. And then we're going to have a keynote address. So those of you who came to our last forum will remember we had Jacob Soul come and talk to us, and it was really interesting. And we're currently in the process of trying to line up an equally interesting keynote address to make sure that we're focusing the start of the session and to set the scene for the 2 days of discussions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about public sector sustainability reporting. Now, this session at the moment, I can't give you much insight on what we'll be talking about because it's going to be framed quite significantly by what we hear to the consultation that's ongoing. And depending on the feedback we get, that will impact what we discuss. But I would say for those of you who are really interested in sustainability, those attending the forum will get one of the earliest readouts of the thinking, the feedback we've received, and I would say probably a pretty strong indication of where the IPSASB is going to go next. And then we're going to close out the afternoon of day 1 with a really important discussion for our future work program. We're going to talk about presentation of financial statements and differential reporting. And you'll recall, if we go back to the second forum, those who've been to a few of them, we did something similar at the Winterthur forum held in Switzerland, where we were adding a number of new projects, and we got together the national jurisdictions and standard setters to really talk about the issues from their perspective at a national, international level. And it was really helpful to help us kind of scope out the key issues we want to address in key projects. And we did a similar thing with natural resources in Canada in 2019. So I think it will be really important to the initial research and scoping phase of those projects that we get that input at that time and identify the internationally relevant topics that we need to address in those projects to get the scoping right from the start. Day 2, we're going to do a bit of a stock take on the IPSAS as a whole. We've been developing standards now for 25 years. We have pretty close to a full suite of standards, and definitely when we get through the current work program, we'll be almost entirely complete the major areas we'd want to address. But that doesn't mean the work's done. there's lots of implementation challenges and issues coming up that we hear from stakeholders. Some of the standards are a little bit dated and the world's moved on a bit, so there'll be some housekeeping, post-implementation reviews. So this will really be a chance for people to talk about what they think the board should focus on strategically in the future in its standard setting activities, how the balance of the efforts of the staff and the board might shift from greenfield new standard setting development to maintenance, housekeeping, implementation, and obviously sustainability and how that impacts the work program and streams of work. And then we'll finish off that day with a focus on our 2024 to 2028 strategy. Again, we're coming very close to the end of our current strategic period. It is a time of change. What does that mean for our strategic objectives? What does that mean for our strategic themes of works? And how's that going to impact our work program? So this will be the first opportunity for everyone to start to provide their input and thoughts for that next strategy period. And the board will start working almost immediately after that on developing the consultation that will go out in early 2023 and will the outreach with our constituents that follows that. So maybe I'll pause there if there are any initial comments, but we will go through detailed overview of the agenda in the next two slides. So if we can maybe hold specific comments on agenda.
Thanks, Ross, for the overview there. Any initial comments anybody wants to make before we sort of talk a bit more about the some of the sessions? Okay, I think not seeing any hands up at the moment. So do we want to move over to Eileen then?
Yeah, so Eileen's going to now take over. I'm going to work the slides, but she's going to run you through a couple slides, and I'm going to try and get the animations right, but I'll have to try and pick up on what she's saying. So over to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Chair. Just for your information, Ross, the animations are going to be very intuitive and less fancy than what I usually put in revenue. So hopefully that's okay to navigate. Hello, everyone, again, and thanks for your time to talk about the more details about the two-day forum that we have planned. And now, as Ross had mentioned, staff and the chair have been working together over the past few weeks, putting together this more detailed tentative agenda and really planning out how we propose to run each of these sessions that Ross highlighted in the preceding slide. Now, at this point in time, we thought it'd be helpful to go through a bit more detail about each of the proposed sessions. And because they will be in-person sessions, the forum will be fully in-person, unfortunately no virtual option, we're really aiming for it to be as engaging as possible and using different formats in each session to elevate the interaction and engagement on some of those big topics. And so what we're going to present in these next two slides is the purpose of each session, which Ross has already started to highlight today, and what participants will really get out of the session over this two-day forum. Now for day one, as Ross mentioned, we'll be kicking off with a keynote speaker and presentation, as well as an update about the IPSASB's work program. And the morning will be followed with a session on sustainability reporting. And during sustainability reporting session, the attendees will be able to get an update on the ISB and the GRI work on sustainability reporting, ask questions about this work, and also get an update about the IPSASB sustainability consultation paper, for which the comments would have closed September 9th. This will really set the stage for the next part of the sustainability session, where attendees will have the opportunity to provide input into the development of public sector specific sustainability guidance. Following this, we would have a short lunch break, and the afternoon will then be dedicated to the interactive session on the IPSASB's two new projects that Ross had highlighted. Specifically, these are the two major projects which the board had added to its work program as a result of the mid-period consultation, presentation for financial statements, and differential reporting. Attendees will have the opportunity to explore and discuss both of these two projects and how they're going to contribute to stronger PFM and high quality financial reporting in the public sector. So by running the session, we're going to start with an expert panel, followed by an intimate discussion where attendees can really collaborate and share insights on both topics, give input on the key issues, and work both within their own working groups as well as with a wider group of attendees. Now, day one will actually end with a formal dinner Without giving too much detail about exactly what's happening and detailed planning, it does sound like it's going to be a really nice way of enjoying the beautiful city we're in as well. And so that will close out day one. Just as a note, did you want to take a pause here to talk day one before we move on to day two?
It's okay. Eileen, are you there?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, just so everyone online knows, we did pause when we lost the connection. So maybe Eileen, you could pick up where you left off when you were disconnected. Well, when everyone was disconnected.
Apologies, I'm actually not sure where it might have cut off. So what was the last kind of component that you had heard? And then I can pick up there again.
Yeah, you were just starting on the new IPSASB projects portion of the first.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. So for the afternoon, we'll be dedicating the afternoon session to the new IPSASB projects. And so it's intended to be an interactive discussion about the two major projects which the board had added to its work program as a result of its 2021 mid-period consultation. And so those two projects are the presentation of financial statements and differential reporting. And so during this afternoon session, attendees will have that opportunity to explore and discuss the two new projects and how these projects will really contribute to stronger PFM, as well as higher quality financial reporting in the public sector. So this session will overall start with an expert panel. Attendees will get the opportunity to ask questions and really interact with these experts. And then it will follow intimate discussions where attendees can break out into smaller groups and they'll collaborate and share insights on both of these topics, have that opportunity to give input on key issues and work not only in their smaller working groups, but also with the wider group of attendees to share these ideas on a wider scale. Now, the end of day one will feature a formal dinner. And this dinner, I'm not sure how much information we can share at this time, but my understanding is it's going to be a really great way to also enjoy the beautiful city in which we're being hosted. And so it'll be an interesting way to close off day one before we move into day two. And so I'll take a pause here in case there are any questions about day one and the sessions that we're running in day one before we move into day two.
Thanks, Eileen. And obviously we'll leave people hanging on the nature of the evening's event, but any questions on process? I should say, obviously at this stage there are discussions ongoing both in terms of the keynote speaker, but also input from both IPSASB and GRI, which we're trying to firm up at the moment. So any other questions, comments at the moment? Okay, Eileen, take us forward into day two.
Thank you, Chair. So day two is just as action-packed, if not more, where the key item that we'll be discussing is the current suite of IPSAS and having the opportunity to provide input into the IPSASB's next strategy and work plan. So attendees will have the opportunity to discuss the past, present, and future evolution and development of IPSAS, including how the IPSASB will incorporate constituent feedback, identify any remaining gaps to be addressed in our literature, and to continue to advocate for the increased adoption of IPSAS. So attendees will have the opportunity to really discuss the board's future plans for IPSAS implementation as well. Now, this major session will provide interactive presentations and intimate discussion opportunities to learn more about the potential projects and for attendees to provide the input into shaping this future work program. Now, the last part of day two will be a closeout of the 2022 forum with a summary of the event and a refresh of key takeaways. Now, as the chair noted, and as Ross had also noted earlier in the presentation, we will be continuing to reach out to speakers, identifying our keynote speaker, and also reaching out to various members as well as TAs about facilitator support to ensure that we have as high a level of engagement and interaction as we can through each of the sessions within this year's forum. And so staff will be in contact and to connect with you. So please stay tuned and keep an eye out for any emails from any of the staff. with that, I'll pass it back to Ross about just the reminders that we wanted to flag for the board today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen, for the great overview of the agenda. And I hope everybody saw something in there that was of interest to them, and maybe several things that were of interest. Again, I'm a bit of a broken record, but please register and think of people in your various jurisdictions and regions who you think might benefit. It doesn't have to just be people around the table or people in your direct network. If you've got an insight or links into your local standard setters, accounting policy teams within your governments, don't be shy to invite them along. It really broadens the discussions and helps focus the debates to have those broad insights. And the only thing we're asking for people to attend, the only fee or such a fee is that you stay in the hotel that we're holding the event. And the reason we ask that is because we had to sign an agreement for the hotel space, and we're covering the costs by having a certain number of people stay in the hotel. So that's why we're asking people to stay in the hotel. And along with that, you get all the food and beverage throughout the day is covered. There's no fee for that. And you get to come to the day one, I'll call it the gala dinner. Maybe that's what we'll start to call it. So that's all included. It's just to come and join us, stay in the hotel. It's a beautiful resort hotel right on the sea. And we will be reaching out to various people to start to fill some speaking slots. We've already started to talk to some of you, but as we finalize the agenda, we will be looking to make sure it's broad and diverse and who's helping us deliver the various sections. And one of the key parts of the forum is hearing what's happening in jurisdictional regional levels. So we will be looking for insights from various jurisdictions. What are the issues that are being dealt with and how those have relevance and need for consideration from IPSASB. So you will be getting emails from us shortly with some materials to help with reaching out to people in your jurisdiction. And we are really going to have a push the next few weeks to try and get a surge in registrations. And as I said, space is filling up quick, so make sure you get registered and join us. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Ian.
Thanks, Ross. And thanks, Eileen, for giving people an insight into what's going on. Just to emphasize one other point that's on the slide there, one of the things that's really helped us in the past has been the willingness of board members, TAs, others from national standard setters, just to help facilitate these group discussions. And the whole purpose of the forum is to get interaction, discussion, energy, and it's those group discussions that are really, really important. So please do contact the staff if you're interested in either sort of leading discussions or just actually supporting, facilitating the discussions. It's those who've been before, I'm sure will understand that this is all about interaction. It's not a sitting in a room being talked at. It's not an education session in terms of our, the standards. It's about people talking about the challenges they face, which is really why, that's why we're holding it, and that's the reason for the style. With that, obviously there's lots being worked on, and I think one of the really good features this time round is actually that the staff are this is not a top-down, staff are really taking ownership of individual sessions and so on, so it's a group activity. Any thoughts, comments, observations? Claudia.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I just have a question to Ross. You mentioned that we will receive an email with more details to the forum that we can give to some possible participants. Do you know already when we can expect this email? Because in the Northern Hemisphere, we're starting the summer season, the summer vacation season, and especially I try to find or track the forum to someone who's connected with sustainability reporting. And as long as we didn't have any indication that we will have at the forum such discussion, it will be difficult to say them, here we have an accounting normally standard setter forum. It would be useful for you because we will discuss sustainability if you don't let the person know that we expect to have this topic there.
Great question, Claudia. So just to kind of finalize that, we wanted to go through this deck today, make sure the board was comfortable and we reflected any thinking the board wanted to add. But the thought process is that we'll use this presentation deck. We'll make some adjustments, obviously, to take out some of the internal stuff. And we'll create a package that will put the event registration flyer on the front. And we'll send out an email by early next week at the latest to all members, TAs, and we'll probably send it to the CAG as well. Again, with a little bit of information that they can use to pass on to others in their jurisdictions and for their own information if they need approval from their organizations or anything like that.
Thanks, Ross. And just one thing to mention before I go to Lynn. Can everybody note that the board meeting beforehand, unusually for us, is Monday through Thursday, rather than Tuesday through Friday. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of work involved in putting on the forum, and we've found that through the past 3 forums, we really need just a bit of extra time to deal with the last minute arrangements and so on. So please note, Monday through Thursday for the board meeting, and then the forum is the following Monday and Tuesday. Lynn, to you.
Thanks. So I guess in terms of the agenda, I think the agenda looks really good. I think there's a need to think about how we advertise, I guess, the sustainability session, it strikes me, because the consultation closes on the 9th of September, and this is then 10 days later. How much will we know from the consultation before we go in to the forum? How are we in effect saying the forum is also part of the consultation and feeding into our response? So I just think how we position that session versus the very sort of the closeness between the closure of the consultation and what people can expect the outcome to be. So are we saying come because it gives you a chance to enhance your consultation response? So I think we just need to think of the positioning. I think it's a great session, but we need to manage expectations of what we're trying to get out of the session. So that was my comment on the agenda, but I think it's right to have the session. One real practical point, arrangements of travel between Lisbon and the venue. Will that be done centrally? I know previously we've sort of had buses, etc., put on. It just, in terms of people planning their travel, it would be helpful just to understand sooner rather than later what arrangements might be available to people in terms of travel between venues.
So take your point on the sustainability session. It's kind of hard to predict, but I can tell you the way I'm thinking about it. And Ian, if you disagree or have different views, I'm sure you'll let us know. I kind of think of it as a first readout of what we heard in the formal responses. But as the board will still be in its decision-making process, it's still an opportunity to provide some input. I just hope that anybody planning to attend, if they're really interested, would make sure they put their formal comments down in a letter, that they don't take this as an opportunity to wait and hear the letters and input. Because I do think when we take this kind of input in roundtables and things like that, it helps us frame the comments we've received formally, but I would say the formal comments are always going to drive the majority of the board's thinking and finalization. But when we've done these roundtables, and I'll call this portion of it kind of a roundtable, I would say to this point, we've never had drastically different feedback from the in-person events and the formal comment letters. And when we've done the roundtables before we get the comment letters, it's almost always a projection or a forecast of what we're going to hear. So, but because the board will have had a bit of a debate the week before, I think what we'll be able to do is play in some of the board thoughts on the high level analysis. But I don't think, again, given September 9th, the timeline until the board meeting, the staff won't have a lot of time to go through the letters by then. The board won't have had a depth of debate, but it'll all be taken into account when we come to December. And I think the board's going to have a pretty robust debate in December and make some decisions. And so I think that's kind of how we have to position it. But take your point, and make sure we're clear on that and careful on how we explain that in our communications.
The one thing, if I can add to that, obviously, I think that's exactly right, what you've said. And that's why in the CAG discussion on Monday, when the question came up about, are we going to accept late responses? The answer to that is no, because Dave's going to have a pretty tight turnaround to get analysis for the board to discuss the previous week and to provide some messages. But the other factor, I think, which will help that discussion is we want to try and get input from IPSASB and GRI about what's going on, particularly with IPSASB. The responses close on their first 2 exposure drafts in July. So, you know, what are they hearing in terms of the landscape? What are the things that are coming out from that? And that will influence our discussions. You know, so we're going to have to pitch this quite carefully, but I think it is very much that this is not an opportunity for, if you like, major new direction or whatever that hasn't gone into the responses. But it should still be a very rich discussion, if that makes sense.
And to your second point, Lynn, because I think the planning for the travel will be similar to what we had in Winterthur, Switzerland, because we've got the weekend in between and people will be moving, and we're not, well, my guess is most people will probably want to see something different than the hotel we've had the meeting in the week before. We're planning that people will use public transport to get there. It's fairly straightforward from our understanding so far. And a good connection from Lisbon to Cascais, and it's fairly close to the station where we'll be meeting. So we're thinking most people will plan their own way to make it from the hotel to Cascais. However, if we do hear something different and there's a need to help arrange a group of people to get there, let the staff know. We're happy to help out, but that's how we're planning at this point. Thanks, Ross. And I think that's an appropriate place just to say a particular thank you to Leah. You know, as Ross mentioned, this has been in the planning for a good couple of years, and Leah's been keeping that dialogue going with the staff at the Portuguese Institute. And there's a huge amount that goes into making these events happen, and you know, kind of Leah sort of bears a lot of the brunt of that in the background. So, you know, and she, you know, very helpfully prompts, cajoles, persuades, reminds the rest of us what needs happening. So just to say thank you, Leah, for what you're doing at the moment and what's to come. Yes, and I just, from my perspective as well, sometimes we forget about all the work Leah does in the background to make meetings like today happen, but she's definitely been spending a significant amount of time working with the OCC, planning the forum, getting the Lisbon portion of the meeting ready so that everybody can have a smooth meeting in September. And, you know, maybe if we could just give Leah a quick round of applause and thanks for everything she does.
Okay, so any sort of further thoughts or comments at the moment? Adrian, hand up. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jan. Well, definitely a big thank to Leah, because during all the previous meetings, she did a very good job for helping us. Have you got any idea yet about the venue for the IPSASB board meeting in Lisbon, and also any information about a group hotel reservation or whatever?
Yeah. Ross, do you want to pick that one up, or Leah, do you want to?
I think I'll say something briefly, and if Leah wants to add anything on, I'll let her come in. But we're very close to being able to sign the hotel contract. For those of you who came to the meeting in 2019, it's not the same hotel, but it's in the same vicinity of where the international hotel was that we stayed last time in Lisbon. We're literally just in the last stages of finalizing the agreement, and Leah will send out the details. But I believe it's the Hilton Hotel that we're planning to use. And the meeting will be held in the hotel this time. And we'll have a room block available for members, TAs, anybody to register. As soon as we get that signed and finalized, we'll send out the details. And I would just encourage anyone, once that link comes out, to please book as quick as possible and make sure you reserve the space.
Perhaps one further elaboration on that. I think it was sort of in the tail of your question, Adrienne, but obviously one of the things that we haven't been able to do both March and this meeting is actually open the meeting to the public gallery. We've had to restrict participation there to online. Do we have any indication whether that may change at all for September?
Yeah, we'll have to respect any restrictions they have in place, and hard to anticipate what those might be. But our feeling with the forum the week after is there might be interest in having some attendance in the public gallery, and as long as the restrictions allow it and the room space is okay, that we would allow and start to open up the public gallery again. We will prioritize those who are coming to the forum. So just to make that clear, and maybe as another pitch to sign up for the forum, if you really want to come to the public gallery, you're probably going to have to come to the forum as well.
Okay. Great. Well, I think that that gets us to the break. I think it's actually been a very helpful session this morning, both getting the strategic context from Kevin and then actually some more operational matters in terms of how we start to develop the 24 to 28 strategy. But I think that shows how important the forum is going to be and how important the discussions we're going to start having about the 24 to 28 strategy will be in terms of the role that IPSASB can play in that bigger landscape that Kevin painted for us earlier on. So with that, we finished the first session. We take a 20-minute break now till 5 past. We will then come back into some of the remaining issues from the measurement session the other day. A very good session, and I think quite a few different leads and thoughts that we need to start to just sort of draw together a bit in the remaining areas that we didn't get to discuss the other day. So see you back at 5 past. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We sort of back into the technical agenda, and obviously we have some areas left over from the measurement discussion that we had the other day. I mean, I know personally, I've found the opportunity to get, initially the input of the CAG on Monday into the measurement issues and perspectives on current operational value and inputs versus outputs and all of that kind of thing. Very, very useful. And then the session that we had on Wednesday with Jonathan and Steve inputting the valuation perspective, and I know my views on a number of things have actually sort of become sharper and indeed have changed in various areas, I think, as a result of the discussions. So what we wanted to do was to kind of, if you like, pick up some of the remainder of the discussion that we had, but also just to use this session really to collect some of the thinking from members at this stage and to try and actually give some direction to the task force on the issues that we'd like them to work through over the next couple of months, through into September. So I think perhaps at that stage, maybe David, to you first, and then we'll go into the sort of discussions.
Thank you, Ian. Picking up on the points that Ian's made, I mean, I think we've had some awesome discussions over the last few days in terms of, as Ian's put it, the CAG input on Monday, the discussions with Jonathan and Steve. Also, in fact, I think the discussions that were held around the revenue and transfer expenses papers. I'm also, as task force chair and the eyes and ears of the IPSASB chair, aware that various other conversations have been going on amongst board members and TAs during this week. So we are not going to be presenting a paper on the income approach today. As you're aware, the paper itself was based on the assumption that we would carry on with the income approach, and it was a question as to, well, do you call it income approach or do you not? Based on various discussions that I've either heard or heard about, I think the question really is, do we reconsider some of the respondents' comments that we perhaps don't need the income approach as part of current operational value? Now, we're not looking for board decisions on this today. What we are looking for are any further comments that board members might have that staff and task force need to take into consideration as we work through the thinking that has evolved as a result of the various formal and informal discussions this week. So that'll be the first part of today's discussions. We will not be answering any questions. We are taking your views. We don't want to get into a detailed discussion today. We want to be able to use your views to develop papers for the September meeting. We'll spend some time on that, and then towards the end of our session, we will just briefly look at the final paper, which was on the way that instructions have been actioned since the March meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So I think unless, Dave, there's anything else you want to add, I think at this stage what I'll do is just really open the floor, as you said, David, to take further thoughts and comments from members. So I think, Lynn, you marginally beat Todd to it there.
So I just wanted clarity in terms of the actions that the staff and task force are taking away to date? Are we all clear what your actions currently are, so that when we have this debate, we can have a more informed discussion about whether or not we think there are additional instructions? I don't know if it's possible to get a high-level summary of what you've taken away to do at the moment from the formal and informal discussions, as you put it, because not everybody's been part of the informal discussions. And so I think it's important that everybody around the board table are clear on the actions you've got currently and the instructions that you've got currently.
So Dave, not to put you on the spot, but putting you on the spot on that one.
So Lynn, I guess the way I see it is the overarching instruction, I guess this didn't directly come from the board, but it's just our normal process, is we asked 2 specific SMCs on current operational value. So we were analyzing those to ensure that respondents' concerns were addressed and discussed by the IPSASB to determine whether any changes to the ED 77 proposals were necessary. Through discussions to date, we've discussed the support for the principles proposed. This meeting, we've worked through the proposals in ED 77 to discuss whether they should continue on to the final IPSAS measurement. So the way I saw the instructions going forward is we talked about 3 core principles 2 days ago, and we continue to build on those and touch on the more minor principles and build those out into eventually a definition that the IPSASB can see in September or potentially a little later. So we continue to work on current operational value. And then to David's point, one of the reasons we didn't want to discuss income approach in too much detail is because if we haven't completely finalized current operational value, it might be getting ahead of ourselves a little to determine whether income approach should sit in there. So I'll turn it back over to David and Ian if there's anything they want to add.
Thanks, Dave. I think picking up on Lynn's point about the informal discussions, I think this is the chance to turn the informal into formal. So if you've been talking amongst yourselves and raised points that you think need clarification that we don't know about, perhaps you could tell us now, please. Thank you.
I mean, just coming to the end of it, though, I think the 2 decisions that we do have coming out of the meeting, and tell me if you think I'm wrong on this, is I think we are now clear that we are developing proposals around current operational value, that we are not changing fair value as in IFRS 13. That is clear, that we do have a separate basis that we are working on, and that essentially going back to that second paper that staff presented us with, that whilst we've considered those broader lenses in terms of outcomes and outputs, that actually we are working on an input focused basis. So I think those are, if you like, 2 firm sort of decisions that the board has made. And then I think we've also collected a number of characteristics in working through that paper 4.2.4, which will help inform our thinking going forwards. Okay, so perhaps Todd, to you next.
Thanks, Ian. And I am one of the members that has had some informal conversations in this area during the course of this week. And it was interesting in terms of some of those informal conversations that my understanding of the income approach was different to some of the people that I was talking to. And I think one thing that would be really helpful to bring back to the board is when we say income approach, this is really what it means. And I think if we start with this is what it means, because if it means what I described to some people, they said, oh yeah, well, that wouldn't be appropriate for a current operational value, but I thought it meant something else. And so I think, again, it comes back to making sure we have a common understanding from which to launch in this area. So if I could ask that we can actually get a paper that says this is the income approach, and actually set it out, describe it, so that we all have that in our mind when we get into debates about where it might be appropriate to use that approach across measurement bases. So I think that would be one thing that I would find helpful based on some of the informal conversations that I've had this week. And just coming back to a point, I think, Ian, that you just made, there was, I think towards the end of our discussion on paper 4.2.4, where we just talked about 3 key principles, there were a couple of others that Patricia raised as needing some thought, and that was around entry price and entity specific. And I think, there are some other things that we need to explore as part of taking current operational value forward, or whatever we might call it. And one of the conversations I've had, I think it would help if we can, at a high level, set out fair value and some of its key principles, and contrast that with the key principles that we're starting to build up for current operational value, so we can actually get a picture of where there are similar principles across these measurement bases and where there are different principles, because it's where there are different principles that will be useful for how we communicate all of this ultimately more broadly. But it will, I think, help the board, for the board's understanding of what's going on, and then will be useful for broader communications ultimately. So there's a few comments from me.
Thanks, Todd. And I think that point that you've just made in terms of being clear about the difference between fair value and current operational value, I'm sure if Thomas was still sitting there, he would be underlining that that was actually one of the key takeaways, not only from responses, but also from the CAG's discussions. And perhaps just before sort of then going to further comments, I think, if you like, sort of further elucidating what you said, I think one of the things that has come out is, and this was where the session with Jonathan and Steve was very helpful, I think we are going to have to be very clear going forwards about to what extent is this a question of the valuation techniques versus what do we actually need to have in our literature, and what's the interaction between those two. And I think, Steve very helpfully made the input that there would need to be a bridge between the two, so that both sides are clear what it means, and from their context. So I think if we can have that as a clear instruction, that we need to have those two side by side, if you like, in terms of the further discussions. I've got in the room, I've got Lindy, Renee, Lynn and Claudia. I'm not sure at what point Camira came in, so apologies, Camira, for missing your hand. Maybe if those are in the room are okay, I can go to you first and then I'll go to Lindy.
Thanks, Chair. And well, I'm supportive also to Todd's comment. I think the income approach is important, and also from the respondents' analysis, I saw that although some respondents raised their concerns on the use of the income approach under the current operational value, we also received some respondents that were supportive of using the income approach. But their suggestion on their way forward was more that, okay, be clear on what is in which situations the income approach is appropriate as way forward, or even if it can be used as a complement to other measurement techniques such as the cost approach or so on, so that so the respondents actually they revealed that it was an useful approach. So I don't think that we should disregard it right now. And also, we have, as my technical advisor, he has explained me in the case of Italy, they use the income approach for the case of heritage assets. So that is our opinion on this topic. Thanks.
Thanks, Camira. So to Lindy and then Renee, Lynn and Claudia in that order.
Thank you very much. And I also agree with what Todd said. I think perhaps we all had different ideas of what it was and how it would be applied. And I think it would be important to just make sure we're all on the same page. I think also, now that we've agreed on principles at this meeting, I think it would be useful then to reconsider this approach against what we have agreed at this meeting. You know, and then say that it's now input and it's replacing the alternatives to replacing the rights embodied in the asset. So I think, yeah, before it would be premature to make a decision now without considering what we've decided this week and aligning it with that. I suppose just thinking ahead as well, it could be that we would have the income approach under the 3 measurement bases, but the approach to it would be different. And I don't want to preempt if we would label it differently, but I think then that would be important in the messaging to say that when you apply it here, it's not the income approach under IFRS. Because I think that's maybe what people revert to automatically. And so we would have to be quite clear what the difference would be, and probably under current operational value where it would be different and the other two would be more or less the same. I don't know, I don't want to preempt, but I think that would be quite important. I think at the end of the day, when we put all of this together, a good test would be to say, okay, well, whatever technique you use under current operational value, you don't have a day 2 impairment because of, you know, you've measured at cost and now you're looking at this and now all of a sudden there's something quite different. So I think it would be a useful test going forward to make sure that we don't get stuck in that. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindy. So I'm just going to carry on around the room collecting comments. So Renee, to you next, then Lynn, then Claudia.
Yes, so a lot of the comments have already been made, the comments that I wanted to make. Totally support that we need to further explore it. And Lindy really nailed it. The income approach may mean different things when we look at how is it to be calculated and how is it to be laid out. So totally agree that we need the roadmap between fair value, current value, to Todd's point. So I just want to show my support. The respondents, as Camilla said, the respondents were very clear, and I feel that there is a need for the income approach under COV. It just needs to be further articulated. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. And I mean, certainly, you know, personally looking at the comments, I think some of what was coming out was just, for example, people found it difficult talking about an income approach when actually you were looking at cost of fulfillment, for example, and they were looking at, well, what are the costs, what are the outflows that I would expect in order to, that you know, I would be using and discounting. So I think that's totally right, that we need to think actually what are we doing here, and even perhaps, you know, one of the things that may be a result is, you know, as we've been consistent and as I think the staff recommended, you know, income approach is known and understood both from an accounting perspective in IFRS 13 and the valuation community. If actually we mean something a bit different elsewhere, perhaps we should label it a bit different, or be clear. So I think those are the sorts of things that we're going to have to think about. What do we really mean? So I see Claudia was going to make that point, so apologies for getting in front of you, but you know, I think that practical perspective and being absolutely clear in communicating what we mean. So Lynn, to you, and then to Patricia.
So we made the decision earlier in the week around current operation. Having a current operational value is the right thing to do, and it should be input focused. Now, input focused doesn't mean, and we didn't make a decision about entry values in making that. Input focus, as I understood it, was it's about the asset that you are holding. So we've yet, though, to see a revised definition proposal, and that's what staff are going away to work on. I think it then has to stem from, once we've agreed and defined what it is we're trying to do, only then can we have the discussion around what approaches and how we describe those approaches are suitable to achieve the objective as set out in the definition. And the debate that we're having at the moment, we are switching kind of like up and down in the hierarchy. 1 minute we're talking about a technique, then we're back into the definition. And I think until we land on a collective and approved definition and its purpose, only then can we then say what is the consequence of that in terms of the approaches I adopt. And some of the things that we weren't clear on, and in terms of current operational value, we didn't make a decision about, is that an entry only value? Is that appropriate or not? We didn't come to a decision about if you're holding an asset that's got some surplus capacity, is it that asset or is it the reduced asset? So there was other consequences that are embedded into the definition that we haven't yet bottomed out. And the other piece for me is that we dip in and out of specialized versus non-specialized, and is that a useful distinction or not? We need to perhaps explore that further as well. I think when some people, and this is not a criticism, this is an observation, when some of us talk about the assets, we have in mind very specific, specialized public sector assets that have to be in that location. But the public sector holds a portfolio of PP&E, some of which is very specialized and has to be delivered in services, but some of it will be general office accommodation that could be based anywhere. So we have to have something that works across the portfolio of assets that a public sector body holds. And I do think that when staff come back with a proposed definition, testing that against a suite of assets that are held, highly specialized networked infrastructure assets, heritage assets, frontline operational assets, as well as general assets that don't have to be in a specific location, that don't, like office accommodation. I think we should test that by having some examples, because once you get a definition, you can only decide if it works when you test the extremes of it. And then in testing the extremes, we can then say, what's the right approach for the extremes, and what's the right approaches that we therefore need. So I do think we need to think about the suite of assets, think about how they're held, why, and specialist, non-specialist, or operation, what do we mean by operational and spare capacity points. I think when we've done that, we then need to retest, does what we come up with, what can we glean in terms of how our constituents might react from the responses that we've already had from them? So I do think that is a test as well, because we could come up with something that we might already know from the responses might not be supported. So I think whatever information when we come up with the next suite of papers, if there is useful intelligence from the responses that we've already had, then we should be building that into the analysis as well. And then my final point, and I will shut up, I promise, is I think there's a need to think about two further things. One is the extent to which we go into what are essentially valuation techniques in an accounting standard versus what is left to the valuers. How prescriptive are we or aren't we going to be in terms of instructions to valuers? I hesitate to instruct valuers in how they, in their own specialists. So I think we need to think about that. And then my final point is, a few people have said, well, income approach for COV would be different to income approach in fair value. The same probably is true of market as well, potentially, when you look at market. So it's not just a case of looking at income approach and potentially renaming it. I think once we know what we're aiming for by having a sound definition, we can then say what are the approaches and how do each of those approaches compare to if there is an equivalent under IFRS 13.
Thanks, Lynn, very helpful. And I think that the point that you made in terms of starting with the analysis of stakeholder responses and then finishing with the reanalysis against the stakeholder responses is particularly important, because actually, just reading through some of the responses, actually, I could kind of look at some that were classified as sort of, pro fair value, but actually when you got below that, actually they were saying a number of the things that I thought resonated with some of the things that we were thinking about. I think, there were a number of characteristics I think you pointed us to in that response, particularly thinking about that entry point not being the same as input. We did touch on the issues around surplus capacity the other day, just landing the thinking on that. The point about specialised versus non-specialised also being important, and that range of examples, because I think you're right, we automatically go to the extremes. It's the ones in the middle, and we probably need sort of, maybe 4 examples or something like that along the spectrum. Clearly we're going to need to guard against sort of going back and redebating each of those, and we need to sort of use it to illustrate the direction of travel, and then that really important point about what do we prescribe in our standard and what is actually in the valuation guidance. And I very much got the impression from what the colleagues from RICS were saying was that there's little specific public sector valuation guidance globally. Certainly there's a willingness to work from the RICS point of view in sort of developing their literature alongside ours. So I think that's very helpful to have that open offer. So thanks for that, Lynn. And then if I can go to Patricia.
Thank you. I think I approach the same point, but in different way. In my initial view is if the difference between IFRS and COV odds relate only to 3 principles: location, existing, and existing use. Maybe the COV is important only for specialized assets. I think the COV is generate different measure for non-specialized assets if I consider entry value and a specific entity, because sometimes the entity, public sector entity, cannot buy something for the price of the market, and there is the specific market for the public sector entity. Then I would like to test the assumptions and understand what is the difference in terms of the measuring basis. For me, it's necessary to have the same approach for cost of fulfillment, because in the cost of fulfillment, the assumption is entity specific, and I have changed my view about the income approach for liabilities, but I think the income approach is not only the appropriate technique for measure liability based on cost of fulfillment, because income approach require to estimate amounts in different moments of the time, and sometimes it's so complex for some kinds of obligation sometimes I only need to know what is the price for example, to replace one object on one good. And it's not necessary to apply the complex approach to obtain the measure. Yes, I think my comments are aligned with Lynn. But I would like to have a document or a paper that indicate the consequence of the assumptions and the principles. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. And I think the point you made there, I mean, two key points I think you made there about the, really considering how it works for cost of fulfillment. I think that's really important because some of the big liabilities that we have in the public sector, will be influenced by the technique that you use there. And similarly, the point that you made about specialised, I think thinking through the consequence of that specialised versus non-specialised is really important. And, one of the points made earlier in the week about, well, okay, if you have market value and cost as techniques, do those align with specialised, non-specialised, and what are the consequences? So that's probably, that's going to be very important to think through. Okay, any further comments, observations that members want to make? Not seeing any other flags raised or hands raised. Perhaps, Dave, if I can go back to you, just from a staff point of view, we've loaded you up with quite a lot of things to think about. I just wonder if there's any areas of that you need clarification in, or does that make sense, what we've been asking for?
It all makes sense to me. I just ask that you bear with us on examples because it's very easy for them to spin out of control. So as long as we focus on the principles and what we're trying to illustrate with the examples, we can definitely manage that. And I think it's a good way to manage through this current operational value.
David, anything else from your perspective? I think in terms of task forces and composition, I think it does really illustrate the fact that where we have a specific issue, getting another profession to input to our deliberations is hugely useful. And back to Lynn's point about, really getting the balance between to what extent do we need to actually hardwire into our literature versus what is actually in another profession's literature, but understanding that and what that means is going to be really important. Good, okay. People are either tired or we have actually bottomed out the list of things that are in people's minds at the moment. I think that's been really helpful to have that session at this stage. I think unless there's anything else on that, then what we should do is just move into the final item, which was just checking the way in which instructions from the March meeting had been implemented for a change in other areas other than current operational value. Open for comments from members at this stage. Todd, first on the draw.
Thanks, Ian. I've got a few editorials which I won't go through, but in terms of the suggested wording for BC 65, I think this is probably a bit more than editorial. We make the point that the cost to replace an asset is consistent with an exit price definition. And I don't know whether I'd agree with that wording. And I think you know, it's at the bottom of the hierarchy in fair value for a reason, because it really isn't an exit value, but it's the best way to approximate. And I think the language that we use here needs to convey that rather than as stark as it is here. So I raise it here because I think it's more than editorial, it's actually a point of principle.
Thanks, Todd. Yes, I can see that concern, and I would have that same concern, I think. Okay, Lynn?
Yeah, just on that, I'm not disagreeing with what Todd said, but it does come back to the point we've just made about we might end up talking about cost approach meaning something different. And so we are going to have to look at how we define our approaches, because thinking about what the CAG said about fair value, meaning fair value IFRS 13, IFRS 13 has already got these approaches defined, and we don't want to confuse here. So we're going to have to revisit that as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Lynn, I think that's absolute, that we have now got that hierarchy in our own literature. And so therefore, back to the point that I think has been made by a number of members, we need to be consistent in the usage of terminology. And as you say, in particular, the hierarchy basically defines techniques for us. So is it the same technique or is it a different technique? And being absolutely clear about that will be really important. Okay. I think it's Patricia next.
Yes, thank you. My point is about the difference between transfer price and the historical cost. In my view, the definition was proposed in this draft doesn't solve the problem. Because in the, I think it's not aligned with the IFRS conceptual framework. IFRS in the paragraph 6.5, IFRS clearly said the historical cost is the cost. And the cost is the sum of the different transaction price and other events, like, for example, sorry, Portuguese. For example, the value due to the depreciation of all the assets that the entity used to have these assets. In the case, for example, inventories. Because of this, my suggestion is to align the definition of historical cost, considering what IFRS conceptual framework presenting in paragraph 6.5. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to take that one away, Patricia, to kind of work that one through, partly from a due process point of view, but also from a consistency point of view. So I think if we can leave staff to work that one through in collaboration with you to make sure we end up in the right place on that. I think we do have to be very careful at this stage of any significant changes, because we have been through 2 consultations on this. So we need to make sure that what we're not doing is changing stuff. So, I mean, I think probably on that point, can we just take it away at this stage? You know, I understand you've got a point on it, but I just want to take it outside because I think some very, very careful considerations required. Lucy, to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, well, in accordance with the instruction of the board in March, the definition of transaction price has been amended, and the revised definition is shown in the footnote to paragraph 7.5 in agenda paper 5.3.1. Now, the revised definition now of transaction price is It is the price paid to acquire, construct, or develop an asset, or receive to assume a liability. Now, considering the amended definition of transaction price, and that transaction price is the basis of historical costs, I would like to suggest minor revisions in the definition of historical costs, wherein we can say now that it is the consideration given to acquire, construct, or develop an asset, which is the cost or cost equivalence, or the value of the other consideration given at the time of the acquisition, construction, or development. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I mean, I think on both of these, my request would be that both you and Patricia put your comments and your concerns down in an email that staff can then work with you on, because we have made a decision on that revised transaction price definition. And we also have history in terms of the definition of historical cost, and have consulted on that a couple of times. So I think we've got to be really, really careful before we make any changes. But on the other hand, the points that you have made in terms of consistency are also important. So I think what we need staff to do is come back with a firm proposal that, if you like, reconciles between all those various competing factors. And if we do make any changes, we need to be very clear about why we're doing that. And I think that goes for any changes we make anywhere else other than current operational value, because in all those cases, we've got that nexus between existing literature, our own existing literature, the IFRS literature, but also what we've consulted on. And we've just got to be very careful at this stage of moving anything. Okay, any other points members want to raise? Good, okay. So I think, thank you very much to staff and the task force for the material that you provided us with for this meeting. I think, you know, we still obviously have a lot of work to do on current operational value, but I think we now understand the terrain much better. And I think also why we've had the sort of confusion that we have had. I think we're a lot clearer about what we don't know at the moment, which is perhaps the first stage to actually building forwards. And essentially we are in that middle ground in terms of COV, that we are not fixing up fair value. Definitely that is off the table. And equally, we're not going forward exactly with what we had last time round. We're somewhere in the middle, based on and looking at constituents' comments, but also taking the professional input. Great. Okay. I think that was overall that was a pretty awesome session, really. So I think with that, Ross, to you in terms of the Programme and Technical Director's report.
Thanks, Ian. And there is one slide that we're going to put up. So just when that gets up, I'll start to discuss. Dave, could you move us ahead one slide? So as noted on the first day of the meeting, I would give an update today. And in reflecting and thinking about what to talk about today, one thing I did want to highlight is, again, for the second meeting in a row, substantial and strong progress on all projects on the work program. And it just reaffirms to me how important it is to get the board together in one place. And I know we don't unfortunately have the benefit of the whole board here, but I know those who are in the room have experienced the significant ability to collaborate, work together, talk through issues on coffee breaks after the sessions, and just thank you for the commitment to work with staff over the meeting and make it a really productive week. We're really benefiting on the staff side to having everybody here in one place, and we can feel it on all the projects. Which leads me to the main point I wanted to highlight is at this time, I don't propose any changes to timelines on the work program. That being said, there is some pressure building on a couple of projects, and I think the one we just finished our discussions on, we're going to have a serious discussion on in September and how realistic the current timetable is. We are starting, rightly so, based on the feedback we received on measurement. We're really reassessing and kicking the tires on a lot of the concepts in COB. I wouldn't call that a full rethink. It's kind of finalizing things we have known there for a while, but it's going to take some time for staff to work through that and work with members to get the right solutions to deal with the issues that we've received through the comment letters. So again, no proposals to move that now, but just something we will need to have a serious discussion in September on based on where we get on some of these really important discussions. Maybe I'll pause there, Ian.
No, I mean, I think, as you say, particularly on measurement, the discussions we have in September and the degree of agreement and clarity we achieve through the discussions in September, I think are going to be absolutely critical. We've got, I think, good agreement on, okay, there are interactions, and as you're going to say in a moment, but I think essentially we've got very good agreement on ED78 proposals. So this is at the core of whether we can approve the measurement standard or not, and obviously that interacts with the framework. So all of those three hang together, and the final approvals will need to hang together on that. So September is going to be absolutely critical. Obviously, we can clarify on editorials and so on in the autumn check-in, but there's a limit to what we can do. So end of September meeting, we have to be very clear what we can do at that stage and how far we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And that brings me to the one item I did have a bit of.
Oh, sorry, I think Lynn, you wants to come in on that.
So we don't know where we're going to get to in September, but we may need to consider due process though, and depending on where we end up with definitions and proposals, at what point is that so far different to exposure? So I think I'm not saying I don't have a view on that now, but I think we should be at least logging that we may need to also take a re-exposure decision, not just an approval decision, depending on where we get to.
Yeah, happy to comment on that. So the board doesn't take a re-exposure decision per se, and revenue transfer expenses is a little different because we're significantly different from what was put out. But the way due process is set up is the board, when it's ready, will vote to approve the new guidance on measurement and all the other related pieces of guidance. And then in due process, there'll be a recommendation from staff on whether there's been a significant change or not. The board should consider a vote on re-exposure. If the board does decide to have a vote on re-exposure, then 2/3 of the board will have to vote to re-expose the newly approved pronouncement. And we can bring some more information on that to help with the decision-making process in either September or December when we're getting closer, so the board is clear on that. But my recommendation would be not to focus on that, because that first you have to get the final pronouncement. We've got to land the principles. That's where I would focus, because in the past we get carried away in discussing whether we're going to re-expose or not, and sometimes distracts from actually focusing on the principles and the issues that we need to clarify.
Yep, go ahead, Lynn.
Yes, that makes sense to me. What I wanted us to do is to flag that will be a consideration at a point in time. It's difficult for you to reflect that in your work program, but I think it's important that we log that once we've got a pronouncement, if it's significantly different, then there might be a re-exposure, and that could have an impact on timelines in the work programme as published. So I think it's important to have had this discussion. I think it's important to return to it in September from our constituents' perspective in terms of their expectations of what might be finally approved when.
I mean, just 2 points. That is always a consideration as part of our due process. We will always make that judgment once we've actually, as Ross says, once we've actually voted. I think the other thing which is really important in thinking about that is partly the degree to which there is a difference in the proposals, and that interacts with the second thing, which is actually, would we hear anything different? Do we expect to hear anything different as a result of re-exposure? Because we have got a very good range of comments on, and the issue at the moment, I mean, there are no other issues in measurement other than precisely how do you define COV and the characteristics and so on. So, I think we're going to need to keep a sense of proportion on this, in terms of how we finalise. It's that, do we really think we're going to hear anything different? And quite often we focus on that, and probably the prime example I would say would be something like social benefits ultimately, where, we did have a division in responses. We took the pronouncement through, and we looked at what we'd heard, and frankly, there was nothing new in the responses, even although there was a divide, and we ended up finalising on that basis that we knew there was a divergence of views, but we literally gone around everything. So I think we just have to really look at it in terms of what we hear, where we get to, and then is that really something that people haven't actually said, or is it just shades on what how we've actually responded to what they've already said? And that is a judgment, and we will all feel differently about that. But I think, to Ross's point, let's not cross that before we get to that decision, and we will get to that decision. We always get to that point with any final pronouncement. Claudia and then Lindy. And I don't want to go much more into due process, please. I think we all know what we've got to face. I think it's actually just about, timelines at this stage. Claudia.
Thank you, Chair. It's a totally different topic. It's connected to the new 2022 project. In your report, Ross, is indicated that you will have now a 1-year initial project research and scoping activities for the reporting, sustainability, presentation of financial statement, differential reporting. We have heard before that we will have some discussion at the forum to these topics, but even then there's another half a year where some research and scoping activities are going on at the staff. So maybe we should reconsider if there will be at a certain point some help from the board would be advisable to get the scoping right. Otherwise, the staff is more or less working quite hard and doing their best. And at the end, maybe the board said, oh no, we expected something totally different.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Claudia. Again, we've given a broad timeline on the research and scoping, but I can assure you that there's not a significant amount of work happening just yet, because we're still focused finishing off the work on the work program, the current project. So you'll recall when we made the decisions in March to add these, it was when the resources become available. And that's as we complete the current projects that we're getting very close to finishing. So revenue, transfer expenses, measurement. So there is some initial thinking happening to inform the discussions at the forum on presentation of financial statements and differential reporting. We'll start the discussions on those projects at the forum, and then subsequent to that, decide when to start bringing it to the board. The program sustainability information project we talked about on Monday, probably bring you something on that to the the virtual check-in in July. Then after that initial discussion, update the work program based on the feedback from the board. And then sustainability, obviously it's out for consultation until September. Once we get feedback from that, the board forms its views by the end of 2023. 2022, we'll update the work program for that then.
Thanks, Claudia. Lindy.
Thank you. Just on that bullet, under no adjustments to work program and the proposal to approve ED 78 in September, which is a bit of a change, but I suppose then I think it would be important then at the December meeting that we do have a specific paper from staff on whether or not the changes we make or the progress we make on measurement, what the impact will be, so that there is a paper specifically to say even if there's no changes or if they are and what they would be, so that it's not something that's left to the working group or something, so that the board has seen that and has applied their mind to it. Thank you.
Lindy, you stole my thunder. I hadn't explained that one yet. So I did contemplate whether we're going to push that one back or not. And we're leaving it as is. It's a December approval on the work program. But you'll recall in the past, we've approved the main principles in principle, and then the board takes a vote. And this would be subject to any final changes for measurement. If there are final changes to measurement, which there will be, the board will see those and they'll finalize that approval by reviewing them and signing off on them. So yeah, there's no, and that's why I didn't move the actual approval date on the work program and leaving it as December. I think it has to stay aligned with measurement. So if measurement moves, that will also move. And that's probably what we'll have to discuss in September. So yeah, I think just to reassure you, there's that approval is more just to land the issues that we can land in ED 78 in September, lock those down so that when we pick up the measurement approval, we don't have to go and look at the infrastructure and heritage issues another time.
Thanks, Ross. And that would be entirely consistent with what we've done, that there's clear accountability, that any changes are made visible to the board. Okay, so move us on into the final section.
So the final point is just something I'm starting to reflect on as we look to the future work program and completing what's currently there. Talked about this a little bit in the forum. As we start to look to close down projects, we're very much converging the thinking that's been going on as early as 2015 on some of these projects, trying to finalize those and build on the work we've put into them over the past few years. And then moving to a new phase where the work program and the work's going to shift significantly, where we're going to be doing more divergent thinking, trying to think about the different areas of the current projects we're bringing on, the future work program, and the next wave of projects we're going to have to consult on in 2023. And just to flag that this is coming, and that I think to be effective as a staff and a board, we have to focus on where we are in the stream of a project lifecycle, from the really early stages of what we want to put on our work program and the proposals we make there, to developing consultation papers and making sure we get the scope of those right and the issues framed correctly to get an input we need, and then taking that forward to build the EDs and then finalize the EDs. And I'm just noting that because I do think it creates challenges as the board turns over year after year. We get new members, you get fresh perspectives, that we just realign our thinking sometimes on where we are in a project and where we've been. And even on a staff level, we have to remind ourselves constantly about what we discussed a year ago, 2 years ago, how the board got to where it is today. And I think it's going to be increasingly important as we finalize the major projects on our work program now over the next year and the new ones coming on, because it's going to take a different thought process and skill set for those we're closing down and those we're opening up.
Thanks, Ross. And I think it is important that thought process, because one of the things that I think actually this board has really addressed very powerfully over the last few years is we used to get a lot of criticism for what was called speed to market. And, you know, I think anybody that hasn't been in our meetings, that hasn't been in our process, you know, it's very easy to say, well, it takes you, you know, 5, 6, 7 years to get a product out. Well, why can't you do it quicker? And I would turn that around and I would say, actually, when you take a truly international board, and you also go out and consult your stakeholders on what the shape of the project should be at the beginning, the program brief. Then you go out again when you've got a consultation paper, and then you go out again at least once when you have exposure drafts of the detailed guidance. Actually, I don't think that's a very long time at all. You know, we need to go through that, but I think to Ross's point, the challenge we've got is we have got what were conceived as, no, I was going to say 3, but actually 4 separate projects in the update, the limited scope update to the framework, chapter 7 in this case, the measurement project, heritage and infrastructure. Those last 3 were committed in autumn 2014. So almost 8 years ago, and a lot of debate and deliberation has gone on. And I think, you know, I'd like to thank the board members particularly. I think, you know, there were some frustrations in that discussion that we had around ED 78, where there have been a lot of previous debates and so on. And you know, it can sound a bit, you know, dismissive, if you like, to say, well, we have already thought about that and so on. But I think that's the stage that we're at. But by actually going through that stage, that will enable us to move forward with some of these new projects. So that's inevitably going to be the focus, that we are shutting down those 3 projects, you know, 4 projects, or we're looking to, rather than to kind of open up new thinking and so on, because we have had a lot of input on those, and we've had a huge amount of discussion in the board. And so thank you for bearing with us as we move through that process. It is part of the life cycle. In some cases, it's been a fairly long life, actually. So thank you very much, everyone. I think it has been a really good board meeting. I think we have covered a lot of ground. I'd like to echo what Ross said, which is thank you everyone for making the efforts to attend. I know there's been some frustration for some members who at the last moment have had to pull out, or you know, have made it but haven't been able to fully, you know, participate physically in all the sessions. But I think it has been, I described it to somebody the other day as it's a bit like the difference between black and white and Technicolor in terms of the debates. It really does feel that way. And I think the progress we've made both in March and at this meeting has really underlined that. So thank you everyone for that. Thank you to the staff. Thank you for the papers. Thank you to Leah and Vanessa back in Toronto for all the effort put into organising the meeting, and to our colleagues from IFAC staff here, you know, including in particular those who came in on Monday on the bank holiday to support the CAG discussion. I think the CAG discussion was very important for us as a board. So I think, you know, almost just to underline what Mari and I were talking about over coffee, it's a team effort. And we need each other to do that. So thank you everyone for the input you've made during that time. And I think that with that, we are at the formal close of the board meeting. The board itself has